So we'll go straight to the minutes of the last meeting. They've been read. And does anyone have anything to say about the minutes, or would someone like to move them?
I move.
Moved by Councillor Martin and seconded by Councillor Brodie. All in favour, just raise your hands, please. Good. So Councillor Berrigan is against. Councillor Drummond's a yes. Councillor Berrigan is against. Councillor Carr, was that a yes? Okay, Councillor Carr's a yes. Good. We'll go straight to. Now we have a couple of confidential items. I'm wondering if we might move. We'll do GFO 1, and then we might move GFO 2 to the end of the agenda with the other confidential items. But we'll go straight to GFO 1, and this is the amended procurement policy.
I'm happy to.
Would you speak to
this, Mayor?
Thank you.
Essentially, we bring this to you because there was a change in the legislation last year with regards to a couple of things. The threshold limit to go to tenders moved from 150 to 250.
Can you speak up a bit, please, Margaret? It's quite hard to hear you. Sorry.
Right, okay. Sure. I thought I was shouting actually, but I thought we'll wait. I was saying that I'm bringing this to the committee because there was a change in the legislation last year, and the amount to go to tender has moved from 150k to 250k. That was one of the major changes. There's also now the ability to purchase off a disability organisation that's a qualified one, and we've got governance in place to make sure they are qualified for the scheme. We've also, as a lot of the public organisations can, local government can now purchase off a pre-qualification scheme like they do in the public sector. We weren't able to do that before because on those schemes there is often not a price. However, whilst I say that we're adopting that, we have got governance in place whereby we're still going to be following our own internal rules to ensure that we do a market check on price. Then because the policy was being reviewed anyway, we've also had a look at our if you like, purchasing of non-qualified schemes and so forth, and they're non-contract purchases. So we've actually changed some of those thresholds. So for example, on page 8, you'll see it's gone from 2,000 to 4,000. So essentially, you'll find an update of the policy there, and those are the main highlights that have changed within that policy and in line with the new legislation.
Could I just say, Margaret, this also brings the policy in line with delegations.
Yes.
Council has previously altered the delegations to ensure that they coincide or match what's now enabled under the legislation. This was deliberately changed to improve efficiency in procurement. So now the updated procurement policy is now in line with the delegations that Council has already changed.
Margaret, can you give an example of a service that's now changed that was previously in the 150 but now will fall into the 250 bracket?
Okay, I don't have a specific example, but I can tell you the analysis over the last, I think it was 3 years, there were only 6 tenders that would fall in those new arrangements. So it's not going to hold. There weren't a high level of tenders. This isn't going to say open the door to a lot of new, if you like, changed activities. So most of ours will fall below that.
And one more question. Just some examples of the pre-qualified disability employment organisations. Who are players that we might use there?
We don't use them a great deal, but it's more in regional Australia. But for example, in previous roles I've had, you'd have a disability service provider, Mid-Coast Water, for example, up at Foster when I was there previously. We used to use a disabled service provider that used to do all the lawn mowing across all our water entities. So they had people with mental disabilities predominantly. That were operating under a supervisor and a supported scheme. So it was a community-based scheme. We don't tend to use that type of service here.
It would be good if we could.
We did try.
Did we
It
try?
failed. The tender failed.
Oh, did it?
All too much.
And the environments.
It's got to be cost effective
Yeah.
rather than hard on the
Yeah.
thread.
That's true.
Yeah, it's got to be cost effective, and the difficult here, of course, is the dense urban environment makes it quite
The scale of
quite
works, yeah.
quite different. Yeah.
We tried it about 4 years ago. Was it 3 years ago? 4 years ago, and I mean everybody's heart was in the right place, but yeah, it was just too difficult for them to manage. It had to be done another way.
Yep.
Any more questions, councillors, or comments?
Just that Ian, oh, there you go. He'd stopped sharing his screen, just so you know. Back on.
Councillor Keane, did you want to move this item?
Yeah, I'm happy to move it.
Moved by councillor Keane, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. All in favour, show of hands. And everyone except councillor Berrigy has their hand up. Good. Now, that's GO1. What I suggest, councillors, is that we, I'll just move that we move GFO2 to the end of the agenda with the other confidential items. So is everyone happy to do that? Okay, good. So let's go to GFO3, councillors, which is the draft budget and updated long-term financial plan.
I asked, given Darren's done a lot of work on this,
Yep.
asked him to
Good. Well,
come and
there you go,
do a
Darren.
presentation.
That would be great.
Okay, in the attachments to this report, we have on page 10 shows the budgeted income statement for the next remainder of this current long-term financial plan. Pages 11 to 17 is the budget for next year by division and department. 11 to 18, that is. The capital works program for next year is on page 21, and the amendments to the capital works program due to COVID-19, the pandemic, we've had to reduce that, and they're shown on page 20. So those amendments on page 20 are incorporated into the draft capital works program. In summary, we look at the reconciliation on page 9 of the report. We're forecasting an operating deficit before capital grants and contributions now of $2.4 million. We're also forecasting $5 million of capital grants and contributions to be received next year, and most of that is, or nearly all of it in fact, is developer contributions. That gives us a net operating surplus after capital grants and contributions of $2.6 million. There's a number of items there that we have to either add or deduct because of the fact that they're non-cash items or capital items and therefore don't appear in the income statement. And the bottom line there is $20.2 million budget deficit. What that essentially means is that we're spending $20.2 million more than we're raising next year, or we're forecasting to spend $20.2 million more than we're raising. And the majority of that is, of course, on the pool redevelopment project. The next little section there shows how we're funding that. And we're borrowing scheduled to borrow $28 million. And to offset that, though, we're transferring some funds into our reserves, $3.5 million into internal reserves, and the greater majority of that, in fact $4 million of that is the unspent portion of the $28 million loan. We're forecasting we'll spend about $24 million of the loan next year, and $4 million will be held over to the following year to be spent. So the project's over 2 years. And there's net transfer to external reserves of $4.1 million, and the greater majority of that is developer contributions. We're actually spending more developer contributions. Sorry, we're raising more developer contributions next year than we spend. The total capital budget for next year, inclusive of the work at the pool, is $43.2 million. As I said, that program is on pages 21 to 23. The difference there is the plant purchases of $2.1 million. So that brings us up to that $45.3 million that we see at about a third of the way down page 23. And as I mentioned, that incorporates a reduction of $3.8 million, which we've had to cut out of the program or delay to subsequent years due to the impact on revenue from the pandemic. And those amendments are on page 20, as I mentioned earlier.
The only thing I'd add to this is that in all of the budget, we've assumed let's say, worst case scenario. May not be impacted, it may not be as bad as we thought it was going to be. So we put, so that's an event.
Margaret, it's hard to hear you, sorry.
I'm not at the table, sorry about that. I was just, sorry, we're doing a little bit of swapping around due to social distancing here. I was saying that, just to add that, that's a worst case scenario in so much as we've taken a fairly conservative view of the COVID, as advised by T Corp and some other people, in terms of where the period of time that we should include in those forecasts, and as I spoke about in our last briefing. And so things are, with fingers crossed, picking up more quickly than we first thought. And therefore, I mention that because that will obviously have a positive impact on our budget. The other thing to note is in the budget, we have, and I did mention this in a previous briefing, the numbers for the pool, the income streams for the pool, are based on our historical, if you like, costs. I know it's to do with next year, but it goes to the heart of this whole question of funding the pool, which is why I'm covering it off, and I'll be talking about later anyway. So, you know, that is that's also something that is worth noting, given that we've spoken about, you know, coming out of this money.
So in essence, councillors will recall with our previous briefings and presentations, with modelling in our long-term financial statements in particular, and we've carried this through on the budgets, the impact of COVID-19, we've presumed effectively it continuing through and for the first 2 quarters of next financial year, so to the end of December. And as Margaret just said, we've already seen, for example, our car parking revenues start to pick up. We've already, and there's a further report on the waiving of fees and charges and waiving of lease and rental fees. We've already advised our tenants, our restaurant and cafe tenants, that their rents will kick back in from 1 of August in full. So we expect at this stage that our financial position is likely to be better than what is currently in the budget, and we can make up a $2 million deficit very quickly if they come back in a quarter early. But of course, we've got to make an assumption somewhere, and nobody knows that there's not going to be a second wave or a need to make further changes. So we're proceeding with the budget really effectively based on COVID continuing through and continuing to have a similar impact as to what it's had in this quarter through until December of this year, so for the first 2 quarters of next financial year. So that's a presumption that the the budget's prepared under.
Are you making that assumption on the basis of any guidance from Treasury?
Well, yes,
In certain ways, yes, and certainly that is how the state has been doing their assessments, or were earlier, and that was the requirement for our modelling for T Corp. So we've continued to apply that
So
that
it's
through.
falling into line with a very different approach.
Yes, yeah.
One other issue is the wage growth. So we've factored in a 1.5%. Now that could be 0, or it could be some other figure, but basically we've factored in 1.5%.
Yep.
Other questions? Or? No? Do I have a mover and a seconder then, if there's no other discussion? Moved by the Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Mutton. The show of hands if you're in favour. If anyone doesn't raise their hand, I'll count them as against. So Councillor Carr and Councillor Berrigy haven't raised their hands, so we'll take that as a no. Good. We'll now go to GF.
Well done, Ben.
We're now going to GF04, councillors, fees and charges schedule.
Mayor, can we have this? Can we move this to the closed session, as I'd like to refer this to GF02 parallel?
Which one's this? Which item are you on?
this is fees.
So you want to discuss this when we're in the confidential session?
Yes, please. Please.
Our fees and charges aren't confidential though, Councillor Carr. You can discuss anything you want with that now.
I am going to be referring GF02, and as that's confidential, I thought it would be prudent to include this, but I'm more than happy to go forward if you wish.
Well,
GF02 is on waiving charges, isn't it?
Yeah.
Your call.
Well, we don't.
If you wish to raise confidential information and talk and repeat the information that's provided confidentially, then we'll need to go into closed session for it. Most of the fees and charges, of course, are things that we would normally discuss in open session. Is this something we could actually move forward on the fees and charges schedule, Councillor Carr, and then keep your comments or the confidential issues that you wish to raise to when we discuss GF02?
I'm only trying to be prudent and I will be referring GF04 and also GF02 and GF05 in what I have to say. So your call if you're happy to in an open forum. I believe it should be closed.
Okay.
I'm happy to second Councillor Carr if he wants to take it to a private
Okay,
session.
well, what we're going to do then, because the rest of the agenda is confidential, so I'll close the meeting now because we've got GO4, then we've got GO2, then GO4, 5 and 6, they're all confidential. So can we close the meeting, please, Mr. Curry?
If we can have a mover and
So I
seconder.
think
Move to close.
Barber moved to...
Councillor Carr moved, Councillor
Carr
Barber
moved to
second.
Close the meeting, Councillor Barber seconded. All in favour of close the meeting? That's unanimous. Thank you, councillors.
Ian, Zoe's still trying to get into the meeting and has been since 6:03.
Yeah, I believe someone from IT has been in touch with her. Sorry, I can't.
Well, it's not what it's a long time.
Okay.
Well, we're going to go...
Or is Darren coming back in?
No.
Show of hands. So we'll reopen the meeting. Yes, and I'll leave the General Manager to read out.
Yes, so for the purpose of the public record, during closed session, Council considered GF02, North Sydney Council waiving charges for COVID-19 policy update and determined that the report be received. Considered GF04, the draft 2020/21 fees and charges schedule, and resolved that the draft 2020-21 fees and charges schedule be endorsed and placed on public exhibition for a minimum of 28 days. And of course, that is a recommendation that will go to the ordinary meeting before that's put in place. In regards to GFO 5 and the proposed write-off of debts, Council determined that further investigation occur on the capacity to recover the debts and a further report be presented to Council. In respect to GFO 6, the North Sydney Olympic Pool development project financing, Council determined that the committee note the loan options for financing the North Sydney Olympic Pool complex redevelopment. 2, that the committee support further negotiation and clarification of the loan conditions and management of cash flows to the anticipated construction program. And 3, that a further report be presented to Council following the negotiations to finalise the loan option for financing the North Sydney Olympic Pool complex redevelopment. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Good, thank you. I'll now close the meeting. Thank you for your attendance, councillors.
Thank you.